Guess we're gonna go ahead and get started since it's 10 o'clock. I'd like to introduce Jonathan Whitlatch. He's going to be presenting the workshop on photogrammetry today. He is an alumni of the University of South Carolina and the University of Malta, where he studied underwater aviation archaeology.
Underwater archaeology. My thesis was regarding aviation specifically.
Okay. Well, anyway, just so everybody knows, we're recording the session for later review. So if you are interested in downloading the video for help with the troubleshooting anything that you get into with the photogrammetry, it's going to be available at the Google Drive link that was in the invitation. So, Jonathan, why don't you take it away?
All right, go ahead and pull up my presentation here. We're going to start with that. What we're going to, kind of the way we're going to go through this is we're going to start with a quick presentation just talking about what photogrammetry is and showing you some of the things that can be done with it. I'm going to try to keep, I don't know if anyone has any real experience with it or with this specific program, so going to try to keep it pretty simple through the presentation and some of the basic features, but show you some of the measurements, the kind of the power we can get out of it. And then we're going to try to do a couple of practice examples. There were, of course, there was a link to download Agisoft Metashape, the program I'll be using, as well as some photo files in a Google Drive. Was anyone able to download those? We can be able to try to do some practice afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay. So we at least got one yes. So we're going to try to go through that. I'm trying to walk y'all through how that's done. I am a little concerned since we're doing Zoom meeting and since photogrammetry does take a lot of RAM as well as CPU processing. When I pulled up the program, just pulled up Agisoft as well as Zoom the other day, my CPU was running a little hot. So it's very possible we may not be able to get through a lot of it, but as James said, we're going to record this and have this as an example for anyone that wants to go back, use it as a reference, and try to use it on some of their more on their own time. And I'm available to email for questions as well. So as James said, I got my master's underwater archaeology at the University of Malta, and that's where I got introduced to photogrammetry. And in large part, it's really for this image on the right, which my thesis around, which was a airplane engine, which is about 55 meters underwater. Since that was beyond my my diving capabilities, my professor and one of his buddies went down, took video and images of it, and I was able to build that 3D model and do analysis and identification of that engine based on the features, even though I couldn't go see it myself. So photogrammetry is growing, especially within underwater archaeology, and then we're getting a lot of growth and start to use of it terrestrially as well. I know our SCDNR has been using photogrammetry for some large blocks. There have been people using it for recording artifacts, museum objects, and we've been using it for grave recordings as well. There have been some research using it for specifically for that. So I just want to go through applications for photogrammetry, kind of what we can do with it, and then like I said, try to do some practice. I think James and I are having some trouble with screen sharing, so I'm a little concerned too if anyone's having problems. I'm not going to be able to see your screen, but we'll try to figure it out, and we'll do as best as possible. And as I said, I'm happy to answer questions through email afterwards and over the next few weeks to help anyone if this is something that thinks really interesting and really, really helpful. In addition to the video, I'm going to try to get some other documents uploaded to the Google Drive over the next few days, just some how-to, some tips, and some other things I'm going to show you as well. So going through the slideshow, we're just going to talk first, what is photogrammetry, our uses and applications. what we can produce, the benefits, especially when we talk about a little bit comparison of laser scanning, which some people may have some experience with or have seen, and then the requirements that go into it. Hopefully this part of the presentation won't last more than about 30 or 40 minutes. Try to get through it pretty quick so we can show you the process as far as the processing. So first off, as far as what is photogrammetry, and for our archaeology and for CRM needs, photogrammetry is going to be creating 3D models of objects, sites, etc. from our 2D photographs. You look up the definition, it's going to be more complicated, talking about science of deriving data from photographs. And in reality, that is something else that we're going to be doing. We're going to be looking at ways that we can get measurements, volume analysis, circumference of features from these models, from these photographs, and from the digital elevation models that we're going to be creating through this process. And so while there are a handful of programs which can process these models, some are as free as well. I know there's a couple of different ones James has been trying to use and learn. We're primarily going to use the one I use today, and that's Agisoft Metashape, and that's just because I know a lot of those features. And if I could give you any advice in learning this process, it's really learn one program. Learn all the features you can. Trying to learn a bunch of different programs is going to leave you not knowing enough of those features and getting enough out of your data and out of your recording. So once you have created that 3D model, and this on the left is a screenshot of the 3D model of the unit that I was taking photographs of in the previous slide. Everything you'll see today are actually going to be screenshots. I don't have any of the 3D models in the presentation. We'll see those once we get into the program. And that's just because they take a lot of space if you put them into PowerPoints, which you can upload some of those into Microsoft PowerPoint to rotate. But once you've created that 3D model, there's a lot of things that we can do with it, talking about those measurements. All right. The 3 primary ways to talk about what we can do with photogrammetry, the 3 things that we can record with photogrammetry are going to be sites, features, and artifacts. We can make 3D models of all of these things. When we talk about sites, we're getting into much larger areas. We might be needing things like drones. And of course, if you're wanting to get into use drones, you got to look at local laws and if you need any licenses to do so. But if you look up, I think it was Ohio Valley Archaeology Inc. and whatever their 3D model and heritage portion of their company is, they've done some great things, especially with some of the mounds up in Ohio. Features, that's something I'll be showing today. I have some recordings of, and then artifacts as well. Once we do have models of all these, we can also upload these onto some online sharing platforms. If we have time at the end, I might show you what that looks like, but that's not a part of the main plan. All right. So I've already touched on this a little bit, at least as far as measurements. But some of the things, once we create the 3D model, once we go through the process of creating the 3D model and the photogrammetry, the things we can create include, we can create geo-referenced maps and site plans if we're using large areas. Of course, the 3D models if we're talking about artifacts, if we're talking about features, and then we can create what we call orthomosaics, which are probably a lot easier to describe and show them to you, but more measurement specific overlay photographs, images of our profiles, of our plan views, and of course all these measurements that we can do as well. So in regards to, first off, our 3D models, here we've got some examples of just being able to create 3D models of units, of features. In the center here, this is a fire pit from Tennessee, a project I worked on. And then over on the right, and I have some of the other features in the program still in it, but that is an old family fossil that we had as well. good quality came out of that one. So I mentioned ways that we can use these 3D models once we've created them. If we're wanting to put them into presentations, Microsoft PowerPoint does have an option where you can add a 3D model directly into a presentation. It does take up a lot of space and it loads very slowly, but you can also use other programs such as Maya and animation programs to create flyovers or rotating models and videos to import. And I've seen a lot of those used in presentations. There are several models, as I said, where you can upload these 3D models to the public view. One of the primary ones right now is called Sketchfab. And for cultural institutions, I think they provide some free accounts. They do have a low-level free account for sharing, but that's one area to upload. And I believe the university, one of the universities in Arizona, has been creating a database, a server for uploading. I don't know what they're going to be charging for that, but there's a few of those options for storage. Otherwise, the storage space, one of the considerations that you have to go into when you're doing photogrammetry and making models, the storage space, you may want to have internal storage space either in cloud storage or in external hard drives. I really do encourage external hard drives, as the 3D models can take up a lot of space. The other consideration you have to take is the number of photos that you are using to create these 3D models are all going to have their own storage capacity and what that's going to take. So maybe a lot of space as far as storage that you need to consider when putting together this whole process and starting to use the process of photogrammetry in your workflows. Let's touch here. Moving on from 3D models, once we make the 3D model or the mesh, as you've seen, or actually as they've updated the programs, you can also do this from depth maps, which I'll show a little bit in the practice. We can go ahead and we can move on to making what do we call these orthomosaics. Orthomosaics are if we took photographs from multiple angles and patched them all together, and thus we have an image which is true to measurements. So they're not subjective to perspective or lens distortion from a camera. They are essentially the accuracy of hand drawings, of line and technical drawings. Every pixel is relative of the distance to a camera sensor in a photograph, and so of course we get that distortion. And in an orthomosaic, we do not have those kinds of distortions. The pixels in the image are true across a flat surface. So here we see one of the units I showed a screenshot of earlier, and in part what I also did in processing this was give it local coordinates and depth coordinates, so you can see in the profiles how they slant. This was actually on a bit of a slope, and so we actually see the plan view and the 4 profiles, which were all extracted from the 3D model. And so that's something we'll show you how to do in the practice as well. Of course, these orthomosaics can then be imported into Illustrator, Inkscape, whatever you like to use, and you can put line drawings over top of them. For example, with our east profile here, you can see a lot of rubble, a kind of a fill layer in between here. We can go ahead and do our drawings over that. Of course, the clarity comes out pretty well on these, and as well as the colors. So I think one day it'll be a question of using these images directly in reports as well, as rather than just doing technical drawings over them or line drawings over top of them. Now, also, if we're excavating units in a prescribed levels, we can go through the process and we can take a set of photographs for each level's plan view for comparison. So here on the left, I have a unit we dug out at, this was our level 2, 20 centimeters below ground surface, and on the right is level 40 centimeters below ground surface and an additional 50 by removed from the southwest corner, which goes down to 50 centimeters. The collection of these photographs really doesn't take more than about 5 minutes. The process I've mainly been using for units includes about 20 or 21 photographs, taking them over the edges and over the corners. And with those 20, 21 photographs, creating this level, this sort of quality images. And of course, comparing the two, we can see where the subsoil's coming in at a comparison of at 20 centimeters on the left and at 40 centimeters deep on the right. And so it just gives us another option. Now, if we are processing this many different plan views, of course, we have to ask questions about storage time as well as storage space as well as processing time. So it may not be something that we want to do for everything. It may be something that is done occasionally, or if we know it only takes about 5 minutes in the field, we can just to gather those photographs. We may want to gather those photographs, store them. We don't necessarily need to process them. They can be there for later processing in the future if it's ever needed. So my point just being, it takes so very little time to actually get the images that we need, as long as we have just a few accompanying notes as well, that if we decide we don't want to spend the extra time to process them back at the office, that's something that will always be an option as long as the data does not become corrupted. And then, of course, once we have created our models and our orthomosaics, then we can start, or sorry, so this would be specifically to the orthomosaics for features. We can extract profiles, such as in the top left here, a plan view, such as on the right, and then the bottom here is actually a cross-section of this feature. And this was a fire pit that I excavated in Tennessee. And that cross-section is actually facing below this part right here, if y'all can see my mouse. It's facing this part of the feature, and the cross-section being along this line right here. So we can also extract cross-sections of our features if we want to add those in. So just another option there. And of course, since we have that as a 3D model, we can take cross-sections at any portion of a feature or an excavation if we want. And so that's just a lot more data that we are able to save and maintain rather than having to spend time drawing all of that in the field. So if those are things that that really come in as positives later, saying that we perhaps wish we had something more, as long as we've taken the photographs necessary, even if we haven't processed them, we have options to get a lot more data and a lot more images, things extracted from those 3D models, as long as we've done the data collection in the field. Orthomosaics for artifacts, we can do that as well. And again, these are true to form. These are directly overhead and a profile of this iron. Really where this comes in hand is, I can think in my master's, having to do a lot of drawings, particularly of amphora while I was over in the Mediterranean. These can be, just as with our units, they can be uploaded into Illustrator. We can do the drawings over top of those as well if we need a technical drawing of an artifact, rather than doing the drawing by hand and then scanning it and inking over it. Now, this is something that I'm still debating on, if this whole process is more efficient than doing hand drawings. But I would say my skill level with photogrammetry versus hand drawings, it would definitely be more efficient for me to do a scan and take the processing time. But there's a lot of other information we can derive from the photogrammetry, including measurements, volume analysis of artifacts as well. So if there's more than just the drawings that we want out of it, then this is another option to go for our artifacts. Or if this is something that we're wanting to share externally, whether it be with clients, 3D models for clients, or whether with the public. Once we've gone ahead and gone through that whole process, we can also extract these orthomosaics. So really, the processing time that goes into any of the photogrammetry, we can derive a lot of different products from that. So I don't want to consider the amount of time it takes to process anything as you're getting one product from it. You can then derive a lot of different products. Measurements that we can do direct line measurements, we can do circumferences, surface area, and volume. Here we see another unit that I've excavated, and in this case just for demonstration as well as quality assurance. You can see on the left here we have what we call, this is our reference pane, and you can see I have points 1, 2, 3, and 4. These are actually given a coordinate system. So as we measure out our units, we all know these are going to be 1 by 1s. We know point 1, which is our southwest corner, at least in the methodology I use, is going to be my 0, 0. And we're going to give every point a coordinate system based on the distance. Excavating out this unit, you can see at the bottom I put a line measurement in just to check how far across. 99.9 centimeters when it should be a meter at the bottom for straight walls is not so bad, so just to demonstrate those line measurements. And of course we can do that across our features and across anything that we may need to measure, and straight up and down our walls as well if we need to get depths. And this is again just another line measurement showing across an orthomosaic. This is again that fire pit that excavated over in Tennessee. And so from one edge to another, by doing that measurement, of course we got a quick measurement of it is 1.11 meters at its widest, or at the profile at least, which was the widest for this fire pit. The way this measurement was done was a little different than the unit. The unit was a coordinate system. This feature, I actually put a scale in it, and we can set points. You can see here point 1 and 2 that we were able to that I was able to put a scale into. Give me 1 second. I think we can close the blinds here. I have problems. There we go. All right. Moving on from a single line, we can also use our polyline measurement tool to get circumferences. This is that same feature I just showed the orthomosaic of. And of course, these are measurements that we were all doing in the field. And for the circumference that we did of this fire pit, 1.85 meters, compared to when I talked to the PI for this project and went back on the projects, I think this was nearly identical. I think we might have been 1.89 meters as far as the circumference we measured in the field. But just a completely different option, a way for us to go ahead and get those measurements, whether it be that we've lost the recorded measurements from the field, or whether we've just decided to use this as recording methodology. If we move on, talk about surface area. This was just a bowl that my family has, some practice I was doing. You can see here, one of the things we have to do with artifacts, and I'll show during the practice, is we actually have to do a top and a bottom scan and then merge them together. But once we do so, once those holes are closed and we have a complete object, we can do measurements of area and volume for artifacts. And so you can see with this bowl, we're able to produce the area and the volume of this little chicken bowl dispenser. So once we do that, and that's for, of course, for our artifacts. If we want to get volume of features or of units, then we're going to have to do that a little differently, just because we are going to have open holes. It's going to be an excavated area. From the depth maps or from the 3D model, we can go ahead and also produce a digital elevation model, which does not take much more time at all. And we can go into this measurement tool by drawing a polyline around our feature, around our unit, and we can derive measurements from that. This is a little bit more estimation from the computer, because what it's doing here is it's actually creating what a best fit plane. So it's creating a plane between all these vertices over top of this feature, this excavated feature, and it's determining the amount of volume below it, or the amount of volume that's been removed to the closed bottom of the feature. So it is estimating what the top surface is like. Of course, when we started excavating this feature in the first place, we had already taken off a couple centimeters of the top of it just in uncovering it, but we do get a good idea of the volume that we actually excavated of this feature. This can also be done with our units as well, drawing polygons over top of our nails, the top of our corners. All right. I think this is one of the last measurements I'm going to talk about, but once we do have our model, we can also piece plot certain objects if that's of interest. This is an object, or this is a unit, I should say, that I excavated with James, and an object in the wall here. On the left, you can see my reference pane. I have each corner, northeast, northwest, southwest, east, southwest, marked in a coordinate system. And the flag there that just says plot, the one that I put over that object, we can see within that coordinate system the actual location, including the depth of that object. And that depth for this unit is below ground surface, as I did not set a datum at a depth to my corners. All right. So just going back over through some of the benefits that I talked about, of course, once we've created that 3D model, or even if we've just taken the photographs and we have that data for potential processing, it gives us a different opportunity for preservation of those sites, features, those artifacts. If we lose data, it's a way for us to do a digital recreation and to come back and get some of those measurements again if we have potentially lost those. We can also create, of course, a digital collection of artifacts, features, and excavations, whether that be for sharing with clients, with the public, whether that be internal sharing. Our orthomosaics do provide us with greater detail, just rather than some of our technical drawings, and that can include if we have a lot of fill, if we have a lot of objects that are in the profile, even whether they be objects that are not culturally relevant, that we don't want to spend a lot of time drawing when we're doing our drawings, our profile drawings, I should say, those are going to show up in those orthomosaics. And so having that additional detail as well as the color is something that we can go ahead and put into reports, put into any publications. It is just greater detail that we can add. As I said, the field recording can be pretty quick, really getting those 2021 photographs minimum, and really take you about 5 minutes, especially once you give yourself kind of a set process and methodology. And then we can do all those measurements and share, like I said, share with the public, share internally, externally with clients. I'm going to touch briefly on some comparisons with laser scanning. The first thing, and on the right here, I have an Artex Spider, which is one of the few laser scanners I have used. I've spent some time putting some research into these as well. The short version is going to be for the cost of laser scanning, which is primarily going to be usable for artifacts. Not something I think at this time I highly suggest taking out into the field, primarily because of cost. That photogrammetry offers probably a more cost-effective solution if wanting to create a 3D model and wanting to get a lot of this data over using 3D scanners. Laser scanning is going to give you better resolution. depending on the laser scanner that you purchase, they can be several microns in detail. And really, the detail for those laser scanners are going to be dependent on what sort of laser grid they're shooting out. Some of the laser scanners, especially some of the ones from Artec, will give you a 3D preview while you are making or while you're doing your scanning. This is not something that you're going to get in photogrammetry. You have to know enough of what you're doing, taking your photographs, that you're confident that you're going to get the model that you want, because you're not going to get any real-time field results or previews. And laser scanning in general is going to be speedier because it is purpose-built for scanning, whereas we are using photographs and a specialized computer program to create our 3D models. But the downside, of course, being cost, as well as because of the resolution that these scanners create. Oftentimes, companies are going to suggest purchasing multiple different scanners to do objects of different sizes, objects or even areas. If you're talking laser scanners, LiDAR, that you're now affixing to drones and doing large areas out in the field. So you're not going to be able to do it with kind of a one-size-fits-all approach, which in a lot of ways we can do with photogrammetry. With a single camera, we can accomplish a lot. So to actually do our photogrammetry, in order to do a camera, here I have my Nikon D7500, which is an APS-C sensor 20 megapixel camera, and I have my Samsung Note 9, which shoots, I think it's a 12 megapixel, 10 or 12 megapixel, depending on the settings that I use. Out in the field, I'll be completely honest, my camera phone at 12 megapixels is plenty resolution to create these models. A lot of the screenshots I'm showing you and the model, the unit that I'm going to be going through as far as practice here in a few moments, those images were taken with my phone. A lot of the photogrammetry I do for artifacts, I'm often using my Nikon. And a big reason for that is it has a larger sensor, which means if I'm doing something inside with a light box, that larger sensor is going to help with collecting more light. And I can also be a lot more specific with the parameters I'm using. The downside, of course, to use much larger. Anyone who downloaded the images for practice might notice the images for the object, for the iron, are much larger in size. I think around 80-some megabytes per file compared to the images for the unit, and that's in large part due to the camera that I was using, and I wanted y'all to be able to see the difference in that. All right, when we are doing the recording, which I'll talk about in just a minute, and kind of the angle for that, there's some other gear you might want to use, including you want to consider shading across your unit. Of course, those would take any photographs. A neutral gray card on the right here is great if you want to do some post-processing, make sure you're managing your white balance well. I already said, of course, cell phone camera will be plenty sufficient as long as you're outside and you have plenty of light. That seems to work quite well, even though they have smaller camera sensors. A lot of the cell phones nowadays do have manual modes where you can set a lot of things. If this is something that you really want to get into, I suggest one of the best things to do is learn more about cameras. Of course, when we go into the processing, a 10 or 12 megapixel image is a lot smaller, and when you're putting 20 to 30 or 40 images to process at one time, having that smaller resolution, that smaller file size is going to make your processing go a lot quicker as well. Of course, the next piece of equipment is just going to be a computer, and I'll touch briefly on some specs that you want to consider as far as processing power. Photogrammetry does take a lot of RAM, and that's completely dependent on the number of photographs you're using and the file size of those photographs. When I was doing my master's, we had a computer in the lab that had our professors had souped up with 96 gigabytes of RAM. And while I could put several hundred images from a full frame Sony A7, which is I think 24 megapixels, into this, and it ran quite slow because the processor, as well as it did not have a GPU, it did not have a graphics processing unit. It ran a lot slower than my laptop. My laptop, on the other hand, had an 8 gigabyte RAM card in it. I could not put nearly as many photos. It would not handle it at all, but it would run certain processes a lot faster. When considering doing photogrammetry, typically the suggestion is at least 16 gigabytes of RAM, and I would suggest having a dedicated graphics processing unit, as that will help the processing time and the speed of it. As far as suggesting any sort of specific processors, age, speed, that's something that takes a lot more research, deciding how much you want to spend, how much you're going to go into this, and how quickly you need to try to turn around certain projects. Unfortunately, there's really no simple answer in saying this number of photographs at this resolution with this computer is going to take this long. It's something you kind of feel like, you know, how much you can get done over several hours in processing. There are quite a few photogrammetry programs you can use. Of course, we'll be going over Agisoft Metashape today. Some of these are free, and to be completely honest, I don't even think I have all of them listed. There's new ones coming out all the time. I think Esri had just recently purchased a photogrammetry software, so it's interesting to see how they may be incorporating that into their systems and into some of their applications. Something definitely very interesting to follow over the next few months, next couple of years. And some of these work very different. Some of them are graphic user interface, and some of them are node based. So just a lot of things to go through in there, but again, we'll be using Metashape today. Other equipment you might want to consider doing photogrammetry, of course, are scales. I already mentioned a neutral gray marker. On the right here, I have one of Agisoft's markers. This will be automatically detected by Agisoft Metashape. You can actually download these from the program. This is something I've been using a lot with, especially my artifact recording. The example I have for us to use today does not include these markers. If we have time at the end, I will show y'all an example that does use those, as well as I'll be uploading some of the turntable boards and some of the data sets that I've been using to the Google Drive as well, so y'all can implement those if you find that more efficient. I do find using those in a certain way much more efficient in adding coordinate systems and being able to get measurements. In the field, what we're primarily looking for, like I said, I'm using about 2021 photographs to get units recorded. And as you can see here, these images on the right are screenshots directly taken from Metashape. And all these blue screens that are in it, all these blue rectangles, are the camera locations from where they aligned, where I actually took the photographs in space. You can see the object here has been to create kind of a dome shape. I try to take an image over every side as well as every corner of the unit from about a 30-degree angle and about a 60-degree angle, as well as taking 4 to 5 images directly over top. Some of the things you want to think about in taking these images, getting this data, is wanting to get the entire unit, of course, in every photograph. Particularly what I'm going to show you is using the nail heads as a coordinate system. And so trying to get every nail head as visible as possible in every photograph. if you've put north arrows, scales, getting those in as many of your photographs as possible is also helpful for doing any quality control, for rendering. For some reason, scales often do not like to render well in these models. And the last thing I mentioned I think is really, really helpful is to have yourself a consistent process. When I do these images, I always start at my 30-degree angle. I always start over the south wall, and I always work clockwise around the unit. That way, when I go into my processing, I know the first photograph is from the south, it is at 30-degree angle, and I work around, and then I come up to my 60, so I know exactly where each photograph's coming from without having additional notes or additional redundancy. And here's just an example of a data set with these photographs. Another useful tip, anyone who does photography, is using something like your hand, a picture of your foot, something not related to what you're taking images of as a bracket. So I take pictures of my hand for every before and after I'm done with every set of photographs. So that way I know all these set of photographs belong to the same set to process together. If I'm doing images, if I'm doing data sets of multiple levels, then you would probably see images of my hand. Level 1, I'll have a 1. Level 2, I'll have 2 fingers up, etc. And that's just an organization feature. Again, it's great to have a process that you use consistently, so you know when you go into the processing part, that you know exactly where each image is from and what each image is of. For artifacts, we're going to use a different technique we call turntable. And as I said, I prefer to use my Nikon, as has a larger sensor, can handle, can get better images with less light. I do have a light box specifically for my artifact, my turntable photogrammetry. And I have these photo boards, which you can see here on the right, with markers. And these markers that are on this photo board will automatically be picked up by Agisoft. You can see a couple different types of markers in the bottom left picture here, some of them which are the automatic ones from Agisoft, and a couple others in the background that are older markers that I was using first. They're great for having those for quality control, checking alignment. The example we'll be using doesn't have the automatic markers, but I'll see if I can do another video to upload to the Google Drive that might show how those work, or show you all those kind of at the end. But I want to keep it a little simpler for kind of this first time with them. And so we'll just be doing kind of some normal alignment. And then again, just as with the other, this is what a data set is going to look like. For an artifact doing turntable photogrammetry, you're going to have to do at least a couple data sets. So whatever your object, your artifact is, you're going to need to flip it in order to get both sides. You're going to have something that is down that the image is not getting, and you're going to need to create 2 models and then merge them together. And so, of course, use my hands for brackets for that as well. And the photographs, the images I take, very similar to in the field. I'm usually taking from 3 levels and about 8 photographs each level. And with those markers that I use, it's pretty simple to line up the 8 different angles. One other thing I meant to mention when it comes to this turntable photogrammetry that I think is really important and will save you a lot of time. Other tutorials you might go through with photogrammetry will talk a lot about masking the background, so that way the background does not render. Especially if you do turntable, your background is going to be consistent as your object moves, which means the computer might render a background, it may not render your object. I highly advise what I call scanning in the void. You can see this bottom left-hand picture here. I have a white turntable, a white background behind the object as well as underneath the object. And as I rotate the object, as I rotate the artifact, the computer is not going to render these points, or at least not many of them. It might create some noise, which you can filter out, in which case I don't have to spend a lot of time masking these photographs, and that's one of the biggest potential time wasters that you can have is doing a lot of masking. So it's one thing I advise. It's a much more complicated explanation than that, but that's something very useful. So that's the end as far as the presentation that I want to give, and just the what photogrammetry can do. Before we go into practice of actually using Agisoft Metashape, I'll just ask if anyone has any questions up to this point. I'm going to assume that's a no. James, I don't know if we have everyone muted, if anyone might be wanting to ask a question or not. All right. If no questions right now, sorry?
Doesn't look like anybody has any questions.
Great. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and move on. And we're gonna look at doing some photogrammetry, doing some practice here with a test unit. I'll switch over the screen that I'm sharing. And we'll bring up, we're gonna start with doing the test unit. All right. So for everyone who's already downloaded Metashape, downloaded any of the files, you're going to get a, when you pull it up, you're going to get a blank Agisoft Metashape here, probably with maybe a gray or a blue background. There's a lot of different settings you can do to set it up the way you want. It might look a little different than what you might be seeing from my screen right now. There are ways you can change the preferences under tools and preferences here as far as appearance. But that's not something that I really want to get into right now. I really want to go through the workflow of creating a model. The model that we'll be creating, I already have several chunks here on the left that show, but it's going to be this feature right here. Should be at least uploaded the right photographs. So this is approximately what we should get in the end. Now, I talked before about doing multiple data sets, getting of levels or of a unit at different points. For this one specifically, I think I've done a couple of different ones. I have that first one I just showed, of course, has the features already excavated. This one here has the features unexcavated, but with the unit completed. And then I even did one for comparison of the surface prior to any excavation. And once we go into this, once it's done, you can actually click on your different, I should say, different points within the processing. And down here in your workspace, it'll actually tell you how long, like alignment and matching, how long all the different processes take. So that's something you can refer back to as well. But we'll go back into the workflow. So we're going to start here. We're going to have an empty chunk. Should say chunk 1 for you as well. And we're going to go up to workflow, and we're going to add photos. Add photos, that's going to come up with a normal window here for you as far as into your files. Since I already have this saved in the same folder location, it's bringing it up where that folder is, and I have these photos. You may have to go find where you saved those photos in order to upload them. So I hope everyone knows where those photos have been downloaded to. And I'm going to be uploading the ones for the excavated features. And I actually have 2 sets of photographs here because I have the raw images as well as the JPEGs, but we're just going to use the JPEGs We're going to do unprocessed. There is some processing, some pre-processing you can do of photographs to, like I said, with the white to change or to correct white balance, as well as sharpening the photographs often enhances the quality and the way that the computer can interact with them. But that just goes into some more features, some more processing that keep a little bit more basic right now. Right. So it shouldn't take much time at all to upload these. We've got 22 photographs, which is a little more than I usually do. So I'm going to double check and make sure they all look right. Should be the ones. Because I used 22 before as well. All right. Now, once we have the photos aligned, there's two ways we can go about the start of processing this unit. We can either go ahead and run alignment and let the computer do alignment on its own, or we can go in and start putting markers in. If we go ahead and start putting the markers in, the markers are going to help with alignment, potentially give us a better alignment or more confident alignment. And the way we're going to do this, and like I said, this is where it comes in the process. I know I start shooting over the south wall every time. So I know right here, this first nail right here is going to be my southwest nail. So I can go ahead and add a marker here, and I can even rename it southwest. And we can do the same with each corner. Now, for the sake of time, of course, going through 22 photos, doing 4, this will take, I think usually for me around 10 to 15 minutes just to put all those in. If you want to go ahead and try that, you are more than welcome to. We are going to be putting those markers in because that's how we're going to set our coordinate system. But for now, we're just going to go ahead, go workflow up at the top here, and align photos. Again, if you have multiple chunks open like I do, which y'all should just have the one, align photos is going to align the chunk that is currently highlighted, that's bold. It's going to give us a few options here, including the accuracy. The accuracy is essentially the points that it creates. So when it aligns the camera, it's also going to create a sparse cloud for us. And so the points and the tie points that it gets, the number of photos that each of those tie points is in. So if we have highest, then it's a higher confidence because each point needs to be in a greater number of photographs. I'm gonna, for processing time, I'm gonna reduce that a little bit. I do think that speeds it up if I remember. Generic pre-selection is, it's primarily gonna look photographs next to each other. So the computer is primarily going to compare this photograph to the next couple, and it's not going to be comparing those to the others. So that'll also go faster, but something with our unit where we're working around it in a dome shape, we really want all of our photographs to be compared. So we don't want those clicked. Key point limits, by setting that to 0, that's going to essentially say I'm not giving it any sort of limitations. Tie points at 100,000. I think with this, we're probably going to only get around maybe 8,000 anyways. But go ahead and we'll start that, and hopefully will not take too long. So the process is going to go through, it's going to go ahead and detect all the different points throughout the images, and then it's going to compare them. It's going to compare the geometry in all the photographs as well as all of the different pixels and the colors, and it's going to estimate the approximate location of all of our cameras. So the computer is now telling us all 22 cameras were aligned. And so if we go to our model here, we'll see what we have. And we do have kind of a nice box unit looking thing. You can see this is where our features are, where they're cut out. I can say that just because I know this unit pretty well from processing it as well as digging it. And the next thing we'll do is we want to look at how we feel about that alignment. So up here at the top, we see this camera button, show cameras. I'm going to click on that, and it's going to show me all the locations of the cameras as they are aligned. And so as we work through it, as I said, the way I go through and take my images is I take one at about 30 degrees and about 60 degrees and over each edge and over each corner. And so as I go through this and just look at the cameras, are they all in the locations that I expect them to be?
I'm sorry, I have a question.
Yes.
So this is all lining up off of that one point we put in the southwest corner?
No, this is all lining up. They're estimating the cameras based on the photographs themselves. So one marker itself is not enough for the cameras to all align. In order to do alignment or to do realignment, you would need to manually put in at least 4 markers for each photograph. So this is all based on the computer automation. I just wanted to show you how to add a marker into a photograph there.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And I'm going to add a couple more markers here in just a moment, and that's going to be, by doing it this way and adding the markers later, this is another kind of quality control thing we can check. So looking at all these, the cameras look like they're all pretty much in the right place. We've got 2 cameras over each edge and over each corner. And we've got 4 cameras here over the top, and it looks like a couple that I took directly over center. Anyone have any other questions before we move on to talking about markers again and checking markers? Alignment. Okay. All right, so now as far as the next thing I like to do in order to check my alignment. If we go back to this photograph, and if you double click on the photograph here, and it'll bring up and show us this one marker that we put in. As we go through these additional photographs, you can see they've got not a marker itself, but a line here. And what the computer is doing is it's estimating approximately where it expects that marker to be, or in line with where that marker should be. So if that line is running over our southwest nail, which it appears to be in most of these photographs, then we know those have lined up pretty good. We can additionally go back and we can start adding more markers in on top of our nails. And I'm going to rename that to northwest. And these will also start showing up. You can see on the other photograph, I put it in the center of the nail. It's just a little off. And for each one, we can come in and we can start doing adjustments as need be. And that there's pretty good. That one's pretty good as well. And so all in all, these alignments are looking pretty good as from a quality point of view. I will get pretty particular about these myself, but I'm going to not do that today. What we mainly want to do right now is we want to go ahead and get our 4 corners in, so that way we can get a coordinate system added as well. So for each nail head, I would like y'all to put in a marker. And I should also mention adding the markers is a setting, is something that you can do in the professional version of Metashape. It is not an option in the standard version. So I want you to put markers on top of each nail head, and we can rename them to our coordinate locations. And again, from that first photograph, that's facing north from the south wall. So we'll be starting bottom left-hand corner is southwest, and again, just as with my photographs, I will just work primarily clockwise. All right. And once you have those in, you start clicking through some of your photographs and seeing if they are in the right location. For this first one that we put in, the southwest one, that may just have a line, we can go in and we can right click and place marker and place that one that's missing. And as you start adding more and more of them into photographs, they're going to start aligning into better positions. I'll mention as if the markers here are green, that means they've been manually placed by the user. Blue is estimation by the computer. Gray is estimation by the computer, but the computer is not confident enough that it is actually using this marker in the location it is. And you can see in some of these photographs, it's hard to make out where that nail head is. I know it's somewhere right in here. Unless for some reason James and I knocked that out the other day, I can't recall. But it's looking pretty good. So the alignment from all this is looking pretty good overall. And I don't want to waste much more time on all this. So if y'all want to go through and put markers in, or at least go through and check and see how your alignments are. How are everyone's alignments coming out? Is anyone having, it looks like the cameras look like they're in weird places, or the markers aren't really matching up to the corners?
Well, mine are all over the place, but I figure it's a user error on my part.
Yeah, I think it's hard with the Zoom. I think James and I were just trying to figure out how I could even share my screen. And James, you haven't figured out any way that anyone else could be able to share their screen so I could take a look at it and do any troubleshooting, have you?
Not at our current pay level.
Okay, very good. Well, maybe that's something that in the future, and Stacy, you and I I've shown it to you before, and maybe it's something in the future we can look at again. Like I said, sometimes in the future, if y'all want to email me or talk about it further, I'd be happy to go through things more and find other applications, other ways to share screens, and maybe go through the process if this is something that y'all are finding particularly useful, interesting, something you want to learn a lot more about. So now we're seeing all these in the photographs. If we go to our model, and I'm going to turn off the cameras, and the same thing right next to the cameras, we can click our show our markers. Our markers here are going to show up on those four corners that we're seeing with our units. Of course, assuming that they're coming out properly with our cameras as well. A little bit about the user interface of Metashape. A couple of the objects that you're seeing on the screen here, this trackball, of course, that's just how I'm navigating. That's the center point that everything is rotating around. And we can, of course, move that around, double-clicking places or right-clicking, and we can drag the model around as well. And that's as long as we have our pointer, our navigation selected up here. If we change any of these features up here, then it's going to start doing different things. But we are going to change our bounding box in a few moments, as from here on out, anything that the computer processes is going to have to be within this bounding box. So in one way, it's a great tool for limiting. It's not going to process anything outside. On the other hand, I've done a handful of things where I forgot to properly fix the bounding box, and I had to redo some work. But before we go into that, I want y'all to switch over to the reference pane. So down here in the bottom left-hand corner of Metashape, you should see two tabs, Workspace and Reference. Workspace is going to be our chunks. It's going to show us the different models we've been creating in this one saved location, in this one file. So I have all the models and all the work that I've done specifically to this unit within this file. And then if we change over to reference, it's going to show us the reference for cameras, for the markers, and then any scales that we put in as well. The metadata that comes along with the images, and I assume that all probably likely transferred when y'all download the images, is going to be, of course, coordinates that my phone took when I took the images. Of course, GPS coordinates from a phone are not going to be particularly reliable, and for something as small as a unit, I don't like using a GPS coordinate system. A lot of people who do large areas, especially with drones, multiple acres, in order to get a good reference system, good locations, they will use the GPS units on those drones to kind of assist with alignment or assist with locations. Since we have this reference, this longitude, this latitude, and even altitude that are taken from my phone, when we put these markers in, the computer also gives them a coordinate system of where it anticipates those markers to be in space. Now, simply because of a confidence, or a lack of confidence, I should say, in that system, I'm going to go ahead and clear that. So I'm going to select them all, right-click, and we're going to hit clear, and it's going to give us clear reference. If I just hit location there and click OK, it's going to clear out all of those reference locations. If we do scroll all the way to the right on those markers, we'll see projections 22, 22, 22. That's our southeast, northwest, and northeast markers. Those are the ones I put in after alignment. The 5 projections for my southwest are, of course, if we go back to these photographs, as you can see, those are grayed out. The computer just doesn't like that confidence, doesn't like the fact that it was put in before alignment, and it's not saving those. So if we want those to be used, we need to click those and introduce those in. You can see we now have 6 projections there. Of course, the error for that one is considerably higher, just because of the lack of projections. But the next thing I'm going to do is we're going to go up top here, these settings under the reference pane, and we're going to click on that, and we're going to change the coordinate system to a local coordinate system. And now you see this changes from longitude and latitude to an XYZ settings. So for our unit, what we're going to do is, I've got this upside down. We're going to go ahead and put a coordinate system in for these corners, for these nails. And of course, our southwest is going to be 0, 0. It's actually, you see it's moving it, but when we adjust here in a second, that should change. Our southeast is going to be 1, 0. Our northwest 0, 1, and our northeast 1, 1. We're not going to give it many depths, no Z, and because of the way that southwest is acting up, it may change a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and we need to check those boxes as well, so all of those are going to be active, and then we're going to hit this refresh button up here, and that should align our unit with those markers in space. And if it's disappeared on you, it's because it's moved space. And there's another button up here that says Reset View up at the top. I'll wait a second because I want to make sure you all know where that is. And click that and it'll bring us back into view. And now we are looking directly overhead of our unit, and we have a coordinate system, and we are back in with our coordinates into our corners. This coordinate system is what's going to be allowing us to do measurements. Aside from the coordinate system, if we had a scale bar next to our unit, we could also put points, markers on either end of the scale bar, and we could tell the computer that how far the distance between those 2 points was, and it'll create a reference based off of that. However, as far as, for one, you can see the alignment, we know we're directly overhead, but I'm going to hit hotkey 7, and this is going to put me directly overhead. We can use our hotkeys, it'll put us directly overhead. We can do a front-facing view simply with a click of the button if you know all of those buttons. But that does get us aligned, and that does get us a little more spatially referenced. So any questions on that? Okay. All right, so now I'm going to return to the workspace panel here. The next thing I want to do before I go on and start producing the dense clouds, the mesh, the 3D model, the depth maps is I want to go ahead and get this bounding box fixed. And that bounding box, as I said, is going to limit any renderings outside. So it's not going to render anything outside the bounding box. It's going to keep everything inside of what we set. Up here, 2 options down from our cursor, from our navigation, is what we call is the region. And when we do our drop down, it'll give us our different move region, resize, rotate. We're going to start with rotating it. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change my perspective from perspective to an orthographic. Anyone who's done drafting knows perspective views, but that's going to be on a numpad. That's going to be hotkey 5, and that's going to change us. And there is, if you're not using those, I believe it's under model, and here under our view mode right here, you can go down, you can click perspective, orthographic, and that's going to shift us back and forth between a perspective view and that orthographic. Again, that orthographic is really kind of true to measurement. It's directly looking down. It's not affected any sort of like lens distortion as we'd be looking even through the human eye. But doing that's going to make it a little easier to get this bounding box directly situated as we want, kind of lined up. And so I'm just going to get that set about there. And then I'm going to resize it and bring it in a little bit around our unit, so we're just not getting any real data outside of it that we need. We want to go look at it, change our views, see how we are with it vertically. We need to change back to our navigation. We'll see our trackball. If your trackball is, if you don't see a trackball there, you're going to go that by clicking on model, show hide items, and it's going to be this one right here, show trackball, and that's going to toggle it on and off so you can see kind of how you're navigating through the space. So we can see here we are, and that's me using hotkeys again, we can see that we are very vertically, we've given ourselves a lot of space with that. With the region, which we don't need. Again, if altering this is really not going to make, the height is not going to make a big difference as long as we have the bottom of the unit completely in. So now that we've got our region set, this is everything that's going to render once we start doing the next processes. We're ready to move on to creating a dense cloud and then our mesh. So before we do that, any questions up to this point, whether it be about the reference pane, the references, the markers, or the region? All right. Our next step here is going to be to build a dense cloud. So we're going to go back to workflow, make sure that we've got the right chunk selected, which you all should only have the one. And we're going to click on build dense cloud. You can see build mesh is already available. We could skip build dense cloud. It's not something I typically suggest. I'm going to reduce this to about a medium quality. The quality is simply going to be the number of points that it creates. Once you, oftentimes with the ultra high, it's going to create so many points that it's almost as if you have a mesh, you're going to be able to see anything. Depth filtering goes into figuring out and creating our depth maps, something I'm not great at explaining myself, but the depth maps, which we'll see here in a bit, is for each camera, the program is going to determine how far each pixel is from the camera, and that's another option for how we can create the model. But we'll go ahead and set it at medium and aggressive, and go ahead and start it, and I think that'll run relatively quickly. All right, done already, at least my computer is. So we're still showing our tie points, our sparse cloud, and click on our dense cloud here, and you'll see these points are a lot denser. We can really see our unit. You all may still be processing, looking at that. One difference I'm seeing here, and this is probably, especially with the quality, is with this one feature that was back in the corner that went a lot deeper. We're not getting great, a lot of great points down there. When we get features that are narrow and deep, it's really probably advisable to take more photographs specifically of that location. It'll be harder for those cameras to align, simply because you may not have all of the corners, you may not have the entire unit in that, in those photographs, but using markers, using other means, you can get those pretty well aligned, and you can get better image quality of some of these deeper, some of these narrower features. So that's not great with that one. We'll look back on the one that I've done before, and we can see Yeah, see, it's a little better. We get a lot more. This is when I processed a couple months ago and at much higher qualities, the ultra high quality you can see. And we see it goes deeper, but we still have a lot of holes in it, and that has a lot to do with that, with the type of feature is being narrow, being much deeper, and not having a lot of photographs specific to that feature. So that is one thing to consider while doing any of your photographs. The depth maps here, if you click on them, they're not actually going to give you anything. They're not going to show you an image with the depth maps. The depth maps are going to be for each of these images. You can see, I think maybe it'll give us, you can see they've got this extra little icon next to each image, meaning that we have a depth map with it. And the depth map is, again, as I said, how far each pixel is from the camera, the estimated distance. And that's just another way that we are actually able to render a model. So we can either, when we go to render the mesh here in just a moment, we can either choose to do it off of the dense cloud or off of the depth maps. And I've been having a lot of results with the depth maps recently, so that's what we're going to end up choosing. But again, just to explain, so with like this photograph, the depth map is the computer has calculated how far this point is from the camera, how far this point is, etc. Are people still processing, getting to this depth maps, this dense cloud point? Well, for anyone that's having trouble or still processing, I'll go ahead and move on so we can show you the next, as far as the mesh, as well as some of the other things that we can build as well. So going back to our workflow here, we're going to click on Build Mesh, and we're going to have these options. And as I said, the source data, we have an option we can use. Even our sparse cloud, which are our tie points, the 15,000 tie points that we have. We can use our dense cloud, which is, even at medium quality, is 650,000 points. Or we can use our depth maps, which are these 22 cameras with the computer having estimated distances to the various points, to all the different pixels within the cameras. Had a lot of success with the depth maps. Prior to a few months ago, Agisoft was only rendering mesh from either the sparse or the dense cloud. Some other programs had already been using depth map rendering. Agisoft added that, and it seems to be working quite well. So that's what we're going to work off of. I typically choose about a 1,500,000 face count, and in large part that has to do with the quality of uploads that I can make to the website Sketchfab. 1.5 million faces gives me approximately the file size that I am allowed to upload, or keeping it slightly underneath my limits. With Sketchfab, there are several different levels you can choose from, levels that you pay for as far as the amount of megabytes that you can actually upload of your models. So when we get into our build mesh version here, again, source data, we're going to choose depth maps. We'll do quality medium, face count 1.5 million. We'll have it calculate our vertex colors, and this reuse depth maps, just keep that checked. I never uncheck it. I'm not sure if there's any need to otherwise. And click OK. This will probably take a few minutes. Imagine a few minutes to load. Does anyone have any questions up to this point?
Jonathan,
Yes.
so with the post hole in the corner, if we took close-up photographs of that feature, could they be integrated into this model, or is that going to be a separate process?
There's two ways. We could really do it either way. We could integrate those into this model simply by adding them as additional cameras. Now that is if we used the same camera, all the cameras you use in making a model, you want to use from the same camera, the same lens, and that's because of lens distortion issues. The computer wants to process this image from the same camera, the same lens. And so if we had taken them at that time, when we already had it excavated, then yes, they could just go ahead and be added in with these photographs and processed. Since it's just focused on that feature, just focused on that post hole, we may want to go in and say, like right here on the photographs of the entire unit, we may want to go in and put markers, say, right at the edge of where we have this burn, this charcoal deposit. And then on the photographs that are close up of the post hole, we can go in and we can put in points that also say 0.1. And as long as we have the same point with the same name in that same chunk, it'll help use those to improve the alignment. The problem being, if we don't have those points, if those close-up photographs, as I mentioned, may have difficulty aligning since it doesn't have the total geometric shape of the unit in the image to help with the alignment, as well as potentially any other markers we may put on the nail heads. So that is one option. The other option is we could render it separately as a separate chunk. So if we add a chunk here, right click in that workspace panel, we can add a chunk here. We can even say, if we rename it, there it is, what do we call it? And we don't have those images, won't show that, but just showing what you can do. And then we go through the same process, creating a model, creating really just a dense cloud or the depth maps. We don't have to go through the full process of creating the model. And in workflow here, we can go into align and end up merging those chunks together. And so even though we've rendered them separately, potentially even taken photographs at different times, like if you re-excavated it, if it came out, good enough quality, similar enough, and even if you used a different camera, we could align those chunks later on just by going in and making sure that we select the right ones. So it can actually be done both ways.
So say we had I guess a drone overview or something, and we had some close-up photos of individual features in a big block excavation. Can those be aligned given the way you just described?
Yes.
Cool.
And for something like, if you have say a model created by a drone, say that's maybe a full acre, the primary thing I'll say is set yourself up for success while you're recording. So if you know that's a possibility, stick some stakes in the ground, at least probably maybe half a dozen or more. There's a lot of groups, a lot of threads that talk about drone photogrammetry, that you can then do, GPS. You can shoot in with a Trimble with a GPS system that's reliable, and so you have that coordinate system. And when you measure those features, you can either set a datum next to that unit, next to those features, and shoot that in, and then do local area coordinates based off of that datum, which has been referenced with GPS coordinates, and you can merge them that way, or make sure that you have other markers in the surrounding area around your feature. And by that, I mean, go back to this model. Say if we had put a stake maybe 1/2 meter outside of each corner, and those stakes were in the large drone model as well as in the smaller model of the feature of the unit, well, then we can just put a marker on each one of those stakes, and that will align it as well. So there's a handful of ways to do it. You just kind of have to choose your favorite methodology and what you think is most reliable. Any other questions before we go on to the next step? The next step is going to make this a little prettier. So the next thing we'll do, back to our trusty workflow dropdown, and we're going to build a texture. And that texture is going to see, we can already see in our model, we can see the plow zone ends, we can see the colors, we can see topsoil, we can see vegetation that's up there. But when we go ahead and build that texture, all that's going to come out a lot better. These are the general, all the general parameters I use. Diffuse map, we want to use our source data. Of course, it's going to be our images rather than our 3D model. We already have vertice colors with our model. And the texture size count, that's something that really you just kind of have to play with as far as different size models and what you like. Over here, so we have 4,096 count and by 1, and that 1 is when you export the model, and you're also going to get several mapping textures that go along with it that'll be exported as either TIFF or JPEG files. And the number of, this number right here is the number of maps, the number of files, image files that are going to be created to create your texture. And ultimately, I just find that 1 is easier, even though doing more can get you more files at potentially a lower file size. 1 is just a lot easier to work with when you're exporting or uploading something. As far as the hole filling and the ghost filter, the hole filling is, for example, the post hole that we have. We have some holes in it. Those holes are likely too large that the program will fill those holes in. It may, but the hole filler is going to allow the texturing to fill in some of the smaller gaps, some of the smaller holes that may be in this model, and they might be kind of micro holes that we don't really see. Ghosting filter is going to be removing objects that have not already been removed that are really not supposed to be there. So something that's not standard. If you look through some of these images, I believe it's these images, you'll see James' foot is in a handful of them. But as James was moving around, as I was when I was taking these photos, his foot is not in the same place for every photo, and thus it's not in the same place for the model. And that's what it considers a ghost, something that was there that is not always there. And sometimes those remnants will show up in your model, and the ghosting filter will help remove that. We don't have any of those issues here, so we're going to leave that with just the hole filling. We can leave the ghost filter unchecked, and we'll go ahead and build that texture. And the texture usually works very quickly. All right. And now we have our model with our textures added. So if we want to compare, and so specifically right now I'm just kind of zooming up to that north profile, we can change our model up here to our model shaded, model texture, and just see the difference. So this is without the texture. This is the model that we just had a moment ago. And this is with the texture. And so we can see a lot more of the detail coming out where the plow zone is. Other objects, we can see more of the feature fill where it is in the profile, just far more defined, really. And I think a lot better color coming out of those profiles as well. I don't know if anyone's computers are keeping up or getting to this point, if y'all are still with me, but any questions, or has anyone been able to reach this point? Okay. All right. So now I'm gonna just set us back up top to our plan view. We have our unit. This is our full model. This is pretty much the end processing for the model itself. Because we have these markers in, and we have, I'm going to remove that point real quick. We can, of course, do our measurements across. So if we want to, and that's this ruler up top here. And I'm going to kind of zoom us in over, say, this post hole, and if I just want to measure the diameter across it, that ruler is just going to be a couple clicks. It's going to drop a couple points. It's going to give us our diameter there. It says 21.5 centimeters. We can clear that. We can also do, give myself a better view. We can also do multiple points and give ourselves circumference. Of that post hole.
Hey, Jonathan.
Yes.
If you rotate the view, is that going to be a problem for the measurement? Like if you were to rotate that downwards, are those points going to be on the surface of the model, or are they going to just be kind of following that shape?
They should, any points that we click should adhere to a vertice of the model.
Okay.
So if we shift here, you'll see. And it is one of those things, especially when you're trying to do a measurement, you get kind of stuck in one view for a second. I can use my hotkeys to kind of shift myself around here. Yeah, but it does kind of stick you. Otherwise, you can instead create a polyline or a polygon. And by doing that, we'll do kind of the same thing. And then we can actually go look at it. See, yeah, you can see that it had a problem with that one right there. It put a marker much higher up. So it can very much, it can be useful to put markers or put a polyline in first and then do your measurements over it.
And can you export those polygons?
It's not something I've tried actually. So here you see, of course, obviously this polygon is not correct, but by right-clicking on it and doing measure, it'll give us that perimeter. Alternatively, if you're having trouble with creating these polygons, let me delete that. We can basically come in and add markers as we wish, and then end up creating a polygon that its vertices snap to these markers. So then if we're having trouble like with the wall, like that one that we just had, and then we might have to add more vertices in. But there we can get our perimeter. Yeah, I've never tried exporting any of these polygons, so I'm unsure about that. But I want to go ahead and move on to, I want to show how to create a digital elevation model and an ortho mosaic. So again, all this is going to come back to our workflow. We're going to go build DEM, and I'm going to do this planar top XY. Yeah. So by doing planar and top XY, that's going to be from our top projection. And I'm going to change that source data to our depth maps. That should be fine. All right, and this is our digital elevation model. And I do want to comment that I think in part because of the quality, picking medium qualities over perhaps the higher qualities, especially this post hole up here is not as deep as it should be. If I compare to the digital elevation model from the one that I've done before, which uses a different color set anyways, I think that's just showing a lot deeper in both the 3D model and in the elevation model. But so a couple things up here. And so we've got these points that we just put in to measure the circumference around around that post hole, as well as this polygon, which we can turn on by clicking show shapes. And now we can right click on this polygon and go to measure in the digital elevation model. And we're going to have volume over here on the right. And as I mentioned in the presentation, what this is going to do is it's going to create a best fit plane. So create a plane between all the vertices as what it would assume the ground surface between all those vertices will be. And then it's going to measure what the volume above that plane and below that plane is going to be. So for this post hole, and that's why I say I think it's got us a little shallow here. It's giving us 0.002 cubic meters for that post hole. We can do the same thing for our unit in general by drawing another polygon here, and then doing our measure. And again, this is not based off of the actual ground surface. This is going to be based off of a best fit ground surface plane that the computer is estimating. James, by any chance, do you remember how deep we may have dug that unit? This was the first one, of course, with those features in it at Bishopville.
I want to say about 40 centimeters.
Yeah, so I mean, that's giving us a volume below 0.33 cubic meters, which would be, that would be pretty consistent with about 30 centimeters below ground surface and with a couple of features in it. So
I'm going to pull up the report and see what the report says. Yeah, 40 centimeters.
okay. So we could have maybe cut some walls out or something, but I've done some tests with some other units I've dug, and I found that it's pretty, those volume accuracies, especially for units, are typically pretty accurate. The features, it's a little more difficult because you're drawing these polygon shapes around them and creating a best fit. But I've had some pretty good accuracy with at least units, because units, I know how much I can calculate how much I'm digging out simply by the size of the unit and the depths I'm going to. So that is primarily what I've been using the digital elevation model for, is for measurements and for volume calculations in units. And I think the last thing I really want to show everyone here is an orthomosaic, and because that's how we can get our plan and our profile views. So when we go back to the model and go to workflow and our build orthomosaic, and we'll go planar and we'll go top again. So we're looking top down, and go ahead and build that. And this might take a moment. If y'all would allow me a quick moment to refill my water and step away from the computer, I'll be right back. now we have our overhead orthomosaic of our plan view. And this is a two-dimensional image that we can do technical drawings, line drawings over. We can, because it is referenced, we can do measurements across, or measurements across our entire unit. Really turning into the big thing here is just for our plan and our profile views. It's primarily what these orthomosaics can be for. And these can go here, right click, and be exported, and export that as JPEG, a TIFF, however we want to. We'll just call that plan, and I'm going to export that as JPEG. And the reason I'm going ahead and exporting that is because if I want to go back to workflow and build a new orthomosaic, it's actually going to rewrite this one. So by exporting it, I'm basically saving what I've already done. And when building an orthomosaic of a profile, there are two ways to get the profile that you want. When we go into our workflow to build orthomosaic and planner, and we have these projection planes, top, X, Y, front, back, right, left, these are going to be our projection planes of this bounding box that I showed you all how to adjust earlier. So if we want, say, our east profile here, we can either take a projection from this right side, and when we export it as a JPEG, we'll need to mirror it, or we can bring this bounding box all the way up to the edge and build our orthomosaic from the left. And so this is, of course, our orthomosaic of that east wall, that east profile, including that feature that was down in the corner. And so that is our profile view. And just the same, we can export, and I'll call that and so now I have these both here as JPEGs, which I can import to Illustrator or however else that I may wish to go ahead and move and use them. And I think as far as our units go, that is essentially the end of our process. That is, I'm showing you how we've got to the point of creating the 3D model, the digital elevation model, specifically in this case we're using it for doing volume. A digital elevation model is also very useful if you are using drones to get large areas and you want to see changes in landforms. You can see alterations like in our unit here, it looks like there might be a little bit of a hump or a little bit of raise right in there. And of course, those will show on landforms. So if you're using drone photogrammetry or large areas, that can be used. Of course, the big thing about with with drones with photogrammetry, it might work great for open areas, agricultural fields, anything with canopy or tree cover. It's not like LiDAR where it's going to cut through those and we're going to be able to get any of those elevation models. If we have canopy, we're not going to have that kind of success with photogrammetry from a drone. So I believe that's everything that I wanted to show on units. Any questions on units or on the process or what this can be used for at this time? All right. Well, James, it is noon now. I know we were planning until about noon or 12:30. The next 30 minutes, that's not going to be enough time for us to get through the artifact stuff. I had thinking I might be able to set some time later this afternoon or over the weekend that I could try to create a separate video going through the artifact stuff. Would you like to try to move into that next section a bit? I don't know how far we can get, or see if I can create something that we can upload to the Google Drive for people to look at later.
Why don't we open that question up to the participants? I believe.
James, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're faint, but I can hear you.
Everybody, if you'll go to the participants window on Zoom, everybody that's interested in continuing the presentation through the artifact session, go to the three little dots on the bottom and click the raise hand notification. All right. Matt wants to keep going.
Okay.
Anybody else?
All right. Well, I'm fine with continuing, and we can, like I said, we'll have this video, and I might see if I can create a little something more to upload as well later. But we've got a little bit of time left, so we'll keep going. We'll see what we can get through as far as with the artifacts then. Doing an artifact rendering.
Sounds good.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and close out that. And I have you. All right. And so for the second practice, the second demonstration, however people are able to kind of follow along, I'm going to show talking about turntable photogrammetry, and in particular a historic metal object in creating that model. For turntable, for an artifact, we're going to have to create two chunks. You can see in this workspace that I have, where we already have this model, I have what we call a merged chunk. And so for the top and the bottom of this iron, I had to create two chunks. And when you merge them together, you can actually see the camera locations. And instead of just a dome, it's nearly a sphere. And that's because it's the cameras from when I had this facing upright and took images, as well as when we had it upside down and took all these images. So if we switch to, and I don't think with any of these, when you're doing artifacts, you don't have to create the complete model. You create to the level of depth maps and dense cloud, and then you can merge those together and create your model. So you can see this is where we had it upside down. You can see the kind of the dome shape. With that turntable photogrammetry, which we'll look at the pictures here in just a moment, you'll see for this one specifically, I have 32 images for each chunk. And especially with that being taken with my Nikon, that's going to be quite a bit more processing time. And then, of course, because we'll have to merge them together, and it'll be looking at 64 cameras. I've had success with using just 3 from 3 different angles. This one, you can see I used 4 different angles and rotated the object so that I took image from 8 locations of various angles, as well as 4 different heights. So that is the methodology specifically used for this one. I've used 3 heights before and had some results. In this case, I should say, I think the best results I've been having using 4 and having 32 cameras. So we'll go ahead and with our different chunks, just in order to be a little more organized, I'll go ahead and rename top and bottom. Since I already have a top and bottom here, I'm going to call it top 1 and bottom 1. And then just as with the unit, our first step is going to be come in and add our photos. And I believe the way I set up the Google Drive, I had them separate as far as top and bottom. So wherever you saved those, go in and add them. They are much larger files. They were saved as larger file TIFFs, and with the higher resolution camera. And so now we have all of these top where it's upright. And talk a little bit just quickly about the board that's using here. This is one of the earliest boards that I used for turntable artifact photogrammetry. And this is just on a 18-inch glass turntable that this is affixed to. These markers I designed originally myself. Currently, I'm using boards that have markers that are created by Agisoft. The Agisoft will automatically pick up, and you can go and actually pull those markers out by going to Tools, Markers, and Print Markers, and it will end up creating I think it's a PDF file of all their markers, 1 through however many they do, and you can choose how many per page to get different sizes. But I've actually used those and created specific turntables where those markers are specifically on the turntables, and I even have text file coordinate systems that instead of manually inputting the coordinate system, you can just upload them. But I didn't want to do all that with markers here for this tutorial, so we've got a little bit more of a basic setup, but we've got all of our upright photos, and now we need to make sure we add our bottom photos. Now, as with the the unit, if we wanted, we could come in here and we could start manually adding markers. Like I said, those ones that Agisoft makes, when I printed them out, those will automatically detect those markers through this tool right here, detect markers. But I don't want to spend all the time doing that today. Instead, what I want to show is the other feature, and that's going to be our batch process. Since we have two chunks here that both are going to need cameras aligned, we're going to go to our workflow, and down at the bottom of workflow, we're going to have batch process. And so instead of individually going into each one of these and starting the process of the workflow, the alignment, we can go ahead, add, and we're going to do align photos. We don't, for you, it should be easy enough that you can select all chunks. I'm going to just do these two right here that have not aligned before. And I'm going to reduce my accuracy just to hopefully run things a little quicker. And now that we have this set with the align photos, it'll run both of those chunks. And this is really the biggest time saver, I'd say, as far as running multiple things at a time, letting the computer run and moving on to other work that you have to do. So I'm not certain how long this will take itself. I'm going to go ahead and click Save Project after each step. And if you wanted to go ahead, you can actually go ahead and add in to happen afterwards. You could have it set to build dense cloud, build your mesh, create an entire pipeline to go through all the steps for you. I don't like to do anything more than just align the photos, because I like to check that alignment, as well as I feel a need to alter the bounding box and make sure the bounding box is good. So I don't like to set everything to happen at one time. There's too many times I've set that, run it overnight, and I've woken up in the morning and the bounding box did not set to include the entire artifact, the entire object, and part of it's cut out, and I have to go back and do rework anyways. And so looks like we've already got the top portion aligned, at least at that medium accuracy. And so once this is done, we'll go look at how the alignment did for both of these. Okay. All right, so at first look at the top, it looks like all the cameras said they aligned. Not all of them on the bottom did, but we can show how we can reset alignment. So let's go to our top here and let's look at how this alignment did. The first look, looking at the cameras, we have our 4 sets of cameras, and they are in our kind of our 8-point system. So all of that's looking pretty good. I go into each of our photos, and now I am going to, as before, add some manual markers here. And now if we kind of scroll through looking at our photos below, I added these manually here, and all the rest of our photographs are showing that the computer has automatically added in those points. And it looks like it's done overall a pretty good job. A little bit of offset on some of these. If we make some alterations like this, we can actually come in and we can reset camera alignment for that one camera to be a little bit more accurate if we wish, if we want to spend that kind of time. But all in all, as we just kind of pop through these are not bad at all. Certainly not for demonstration purposes and for getting everyone to see how the system works today. Now, on the other hand, if we go to the second chunk, our bottom here, according to this, not all of our cameras aligned. So we'll see here, the ones that have check marks, these are the ones that have aligned. The ones without check marks have not. So let's scroll in here and see what we've got going on. Right away, you can see some of these, they're all bunched in one place rather than our dome shape. And so that's certainly going to be a problem. But as I said, with these markers, we can fix that. We just have to go in and manually add these. Yeah, so we can see right away, these are not matched up at all. In order to do realignment, Metashape needs really 4 good markers. In this case, we got one of our targets is behind our object. So I'm going to remove that. It may not realign great in a realignment later. We do have this scale bar that I have on here as well that we could add markers to if we need more markers. But I don't want to spend a lot of time just doing markers right now because this can take 10 minutes if we're going to do markers for all of these. What I think we'll do instead, so we can move on to showing y'all how to merge these chunks, is I will use we'll go ahead and do a dense cloud and depth maps for this chunk right here. And I will go ahead and I'll show you all the alignment and doing merging with this chunk that I've already created from the bottom. So again, we'll go to our workflow, we'll do build dense cloud. Again, if we're doing multiple, we can do these as batches. Since I'm just going to do the one right now, I'll do this individually and do it medium. All right, so we have our dense cloud. In this case, we have rendered the area beneath our object. And what I'm going to simply do, since we're going to merge it with, there we go. I'm going to switch it to orthographic view, which, to remind y'all, you go to model and navigate view mode, and that's this right here. I just use hotkeys as well. And what I'm going to do is remove this bottom. So we're going to lined up, and we're actually going to delete those points prior to merging the model together. I'm not going to worry too much about how much I'm cutting off, since I'm going to have it's this one, right? Yeah, since we're going to have the complete bottom in this other chunk. We can see here, and so we have a lot of overlap with the top, just as the original one I did. Cut off a little bit bottom. We're going to cut off part of the bottom of this, and it's going to merge together. Now, when we go to merge two chunks, there's a couple ways that we can do it. Prior to merging them, we do have to align the two chunks. And so hopefully this will not become a problem with having multiple chunks in here. In fact, I'm actually just going to make sure that we don't potentially have any issues. I'm going to delete these. Sometimes when you have more chunks than you're aligning, it'll try to align all. So I'm going to save this as a new file real quick. And we're going to go to our, when we go to, so this align here, when we align chunks, there's two ways that we can do this alignment: point-based or marker-based. It does give us this option for camera-based. I've never used that. I've never had a need for it. Obviously, when we're changing things around with the camera, the locations of the camera, and the turntable, camera-based would not be efficient here. So a lot of times I'll add markers here in on the object in order to do a good alignment. You can do point-based, but we get I feel like a lot better results with a marker base. So I'm going to remove any old markers right now. And then we're going to go in and we're going to add some markers to our dense cloud that will help it align. And really, we need to add markers that for properties that are going to be in both models. And just like our images 4 is kind of what we need. So for this specifically, I'm going to put it kind of in the center of where that handle goes. getting it pretty close will do, and the computer will kind of adjust. It might be a little off. But again, for time and for demonstration, I want to go ahead and get us kind of to this point. And we'll go back to the other one. And see this. And to this one. Sometimes finding good markers for this alignment on some of your artifacts is some of the trickiest part, simply because you might be looking for colors or you might be looking for features that show up in both in order to merge them together. And as I said, I'm usually a lot more picky about looking to see that I have them in the right place, but we're going to try to get them as close as possible. And I know we're just about out of time. I don't know, James, is the Zoom call going to automatically cut off when we hit our time?
No, it's not going to cut off.
Okay. All right, so I think those are about in the right spots. You might want to shift this one a bit, I think. All right, so it may not align perfectly because of where these points are, but we'll go ahead and align our chunks and we'll do it marker based. And that goes, the marker based does go a lot quicker for alignment than the point based when the computer does it itself. And I mean, right away I can say I wouldn't call that perfect compared to perhaps some of the ones I did before, but that's not bad at all. It's lining up pretty good there overall. See, some of the points look just a little off, but that's not too bad. So now that we have our alignment, we're going to go merge chunks again under workflow, select both, and we're going to merge dense clouds and merge depth maps. And that might take a few moments here to process as well. Like I said, we got a lot of points and a lot of cameras and camera locations that are going to be merging between these two. And that actually worked a lot faster than I expected. I'm going to turn off these markers, going to turn off that, and that is our merged dense cloud. So we have the bottom of our iron, we have the top. You can see where the handles go in there, they didn't merge perfectly, in large part just because I'm going through this a little quickly. The other side looks like it did much better. And then we go through the same process here with workflow to build our mesh. And I think this time I'll do it from the dense cloud. Right. And so now we have our 3D model based on that dense cloud from those two merged chunks. And our last process for the model is going to be building texture. And it's just the exact same as the unit. Under workflow, build texture, make those choices that we want as far as the parameters. For the texture stuff, I essentially leave it in the same place. I've made very few alterations to any of the texture parameters. Since we're now working with 64 cameras, since we have had 32 each, and they've been merged together, it's likely one reason the texturing's going to take longer rather than working with the unit, which was 22 photographs, and taking texturing from those images. Just one thing to think about as well with the artifact stuff. Once do merging, you're all of a sudden working with a lot more photos, and so the last couple bits of processing may take a little longer. And as far as 3D model goes, that will be our final product. Again, the alignment for the merging could be a little bit better. We'd spend some more time refining that, putting better markers on there. But as far as the texture goes, that's without the texture, and that is with the texture. Now, for points and all, I haven't added a coordinate system in or any reference at this time. I'll go back to these cameras. The photo board I was using here, I did include, I had a scale bar, and so one way to add references that you can do is add markers here. So we have 0.6 and 0.5. Go down here to our tabs to our reference pane, and 0.5 and 0.6, and we are going to right-click on them and create a scale bar. If I recall, that is 10 centimeters, so that is going to be 0.1, and I'll refresh that. We'll go back to this dense cloud, just of this, and that's just of this bottom. And with that scale added in, we should be able to do some of our measurements, just like that. I don't think the measurements will work on our merge chunk right now because I did this after the fact. I hadn't put that in with the merge chunk, but in general, those references should carry over for any of your merged chunks. I can check real quick, but I'm not certain. Oh, it still gave me that. Okay. I did not think it actually would, but we do have that measurement. The last measurement I do want to show you on here then is area and volume. And if our merge went well and our mesh went well and all the holes are closed, then we should be able to go here, Tools, Mesh, Measure Area and Volume. And we have our area in square meters and our volume in cubic meters of our object / artifact. And aside from creating any orthomosaics of the object, which again you could put into Illustrator, you translate however, which I've already shown how to do with the unit, I believe that's everything I had planned to show. Are there any questions, or is anyone interested in any other information related to using photogrammetry to make models of units or artifacts or otherwise?
Well, I want to say thanks, Jonathan, for putting this together for us, going through this very detailed process. And, we really appreciate you spending the time for the
James, you're not coming through very good for me. I don't know if anyone else can hear you either.
I was just saying, I really appreciate the amount of time and effort you put into this presentation. And the detail that you've gone into the process of doing models of artifacts and also excavation units. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's been something really fun, a different kind of process to research and work on. I feel like it's kind of a basic overview. Some of the ways I've been using markers, some more automated things, and some other processing things I've been doing I really didn't show, which can help in the workflows. But I really hope everyone who's interested has at least a basic understanding of kind of what's needed and kind of the workflow and what can be produced from it, and can go from there to create, higher quality models and products from at least knowing some basics.
All right. Well, if anybody has any more questions for Jonathan, you can reach him at his email address. And we're going to stop the workshop now. The program will take a few minutes to process the recording, and then it will be set up on that Google Drive link that it was included in the invitation.
All right. I think I've got a couple other resources that I've got to check to see what state they are as far as editing, but I'm hoping to get those uploaded to the Google Drive over the next few days as well, as far as just how-tos, tips and tricks, things like that.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. That was very interesting.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks a lot, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you all.
It was really good.
Thank you all for joining and taking an interest. And yeah, if y'all have any questions, feel free to send me an email. I think my email is in the original email that was sent out to everyone. So, I guess, James, I'm closing this out if you switched me over to host.
Yep.
All right. Do you know, are you going to get the recording, or if you switched me, will that come back to me?
I'm going to get the recording.
Okay, great. If you have any problems on your end, then just give me a call.
Will do.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Bye.